This is our inaugural talk together about ThunderLabs, Spartan. The result that we're looking for here is to communicate with customers what we're thinking around Spartan methodology, ThunderLabs at large, and I think it's fair to say it's a bit of an experiment, right?
It is.
I've got 90 questions here. None of them are about Spartan. But I'll come to those afterwards. So on the cover of the SpartanMethod.com website, the governance model that lets enterprises deliver tech at speed and scale. That's what it says. Mm-hmm. What is that?
So if you ask a CIO if they've succeeded with Agile, they'll usually say yes, right? Mm. You go and ask everyone else and they'll usually say no. Mm-hmm. My thesis on why that is that Agile never really came up with an alternative way to govern a project. So in a waterfall world, planning, analysis, design, construction, testing, go live. And that whole delivery phase is controlled using a document which was written 1, 2, 3 years before you start the planning phase. You need a business case, you need cost, you need an architecture, choose technologies, get the money. And your way of knowing, the reason you're doing all of that is you need to be able to track the delivery of the project and say, we are either on track or off track, which is a governance model, right? I think the reason that Agile has failed to deliver at dramatically higher speed for most projects, which is my contention and that of many business people, is because without having a way of governing your project that's agile, people have to revert back to the old way. So they run an agile project, but they govern it using a traditional cost-benefit model, case, scope document. So you end up with the same result. It's the governance model that drives whether you're being agile or not a stand-up, not a demo, a retrospective. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people will say, I'm running an agile project, but only in test. And if you talk to anyone who signed the Agile Manifesto, they'll say that's not what they meant. What they meant was deliver early and deliver often means you deliver at the beginning of the project, not at the end of the project. Mm-hmm. But the governance model gets involved and says, well, you've got to build all this stuff, so people just follow that model, and they've got all sorts of restrictions on why they don't want to go live, so they don't go live. Mm-hmm.
Are there examples that disprove your thinking, that CIOs say they're happy and the business say that they are not happy? I mean, surely there are instances where an agile approach has worked and the governance model hasn't weighted it down too much. Surely there are examples of that, and who would you point to for those?
I would say that happens in the product world, but not in the world of digital projects as projects where you're trying to drive efficiency into your business using digital technology, which is just a system that people are using internally. Mm. It's not a product that you're selling to the market. Mm-hmm. So Google, Facebook, Spotify, these are all places that have been well documented as having a culture and a way of directing the work that they're doing, but they're directing the work of a product, which is very different. Mm-hmm. Running a project to achieve a business outcome is very different from building a product, making it better and better and better over time with a permanent team and getting it out to market.
So your view is that Agile applied to business outcomes or business projects as opposed to products doesn't work. It's fundamentally broken.
I haven't seen it work. Mm-hmm. And that comes from 15 years of doing digital project rescue, right? So, and there were some patterns, and the patterns are still there today. People are still trying to govern the projects. And it's fair, right? It's just because the Agile community as a whole didn't write down, okay, well, if I'm not using a big document, a scope document to govern whether I'm on track or not, like have I built these 72 functions, how do I do it? And no one's really come up with a good way of doing that. And it is a really, really simple way of doing it, which is you skip the document and you give the whole team the responsibility to deliver what was in the business case. Mm-hmm. That's what we call outcomes, right? So it's the business outcome. It's the benefit side of the cost-benefit case. Mm-hmm. An example is you're called in to fix the application form for a university because it's got 2,000 change requests. Well, that's not really a business outcome. Like, how do I know when I'm finished? How do I know if I've succeeded? If I don't write down the 70 features that I think are going to deliver that outcome, so it's not very useful. But you work with the business and follow a particular questioning process, a structure, a nice simple structure that you can teach PAs or project managers. And you can convert that into, we want to reduce the number of inbound contacts to the contact center to get a valid student application. So you give that as the brief to the team. And the reason you can use that to govern with is you say, well, how many people are going to be using the system eventually? It might be, 1,500 people or whatever, agents, students, whatever, per year. You can then deliver at the beginning of the project to a small group of those people, and you can demonstrate whether you have or haven't reached that objective, but just for that subset of people. So instead of figuring out whether you're on track because of a scope document, you're figuring out whether you're on track for the actual outcome you're trying to deliver, because you either have or you haven't dramatically reduced the number of inbound contacts. It's a measurable thing. You can measure it at the beginning, all the way through, and at the end. So, and this is more in line with, deliver early, deliver often, which is I actually believe that should have been the first line of the Agile Manifesto, but it's actually in the supporting what do you call those things? Principles.
I have a two-faced question on this, and choose to answer it in any way you want, but it's important to get them both out. So let's just say that an organization is outcome-orientated and they've got the right brief and the right mandate, right? The two questions I have is, what's the key things that leaders should do, the leader of the person responsible for getting the outcome, let's say, what's the key things that they should do? And then the second part is, what's the right process? And I'm even not sure which way to ask those two questions. Like, what should the leader do? And then what's the right process? And which, is it process first or is it attitude? Like what comes first to your mind?
In your question, you're asking, what should the leader do? What do you mean by in order to achieve what? You mean to follow Spartan or to get an outcome or?
Well, I've read the book Beyond Agile, right? And I've also known you for 10 years, and it's fair to say I've drank the Kool-Aid. Now I feel like I'm still learning, right? I'm genuinely learning how we do this. And I notice that even if people go, okay, I feel like I want to work to outcomes as opposed to a scope document, it's like, well now what? Do they follow a specific methodology, or do they...
Yes, okay, so I understand the question. Training. Very short bit of training just to demonstrate what is a well-stated outcome versus what's not, and a whole bunch of things to look out for. So, beware of A, beware of B, beware of C. So number one is you want to be aware, as soon as you start talking to someone about what's the reason you're doing this project, they'll give you more than one thing. They'll say, we're trying to reduce the amount of time it takes to ABC, we're trying to get fewer people to do more of the work or the same number of people to do more work. And then mix all that, so customer satisfaction often comes into it. So one of the things we teach in the methodology is narrow that down. So and we give a bunch of phrases like, we're going to deal with all of these eventually. We're going to deal with one of these first, because if we try and deal with both of those business outcomes, we've got more than one sponsor. And if you've got more than one sponsor, then they're pulling in different directions. The head of the call center has a different objective than the head of marketing. And if both of those people are sponsoring your project, it's going to be awkward. So yeah, it's a process. It's more of a skill. But it's a very simple structure to explain to people. Just go through a couple of examples in a workshop. And when we have a little bit more time, we'll start posting some of that content.
Yeah, I guess the point today is just a teaser, and for us to understand how we might articulate this to people to help them get their benefits. And just to be clear, I'm not necessarily advocating people consume Spartan or use ThunderLabs or go down the path of any particular supplier. I'm genuinely interested in outcomes for many friends I have in technology delivery, trying to work out how they deliver in a modern way in often archaic organizations where they feel hamstrung. I feel that this is a channel for them to listen to and work this out. Now I'm just going to repeat what I heard from you. The right process is to start with training, which is what you said. And an example would be to train people in ascertaining what is a well-stated outcome, to then do things like make sure there's one sponsor nominated. And you're saying it's a process as well as a skill. So on my mind there is, okay, so it's all well and good going well-stated outcomes and nominating one sponsor. But you're making me think about, well, then what? And one of the skills that I observe in you is I've always thought that you're, and I'm thinking about the attributes of the individual. I used the word to you the other day, specificity. You're always very specific about what needs to be done. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, so you've been there, you've got one outcome, or well-stated outcome rather, you've nominated one sponsor, then what? Like, then what? And what else happens?
Yeah, so that's the first step. Step number one is you talk about the problem, actually. I'm just using the training in understanding when you've got a well-stated objective and outcome. So step one is actually you talk about the problem for long enough that you stop people talking about the solution, because in IT we've forgotten that skill, right? You say, we have a problem with the call center, and you're about to finish your sentence, and someone says, we need Salesforce. And I haven't told you what my problem is yet, have I? So number one, problem, and isolating a single problem, stating the problem well. Number two, you flip that on its head and you say, well, if I run a pilot for this, or even if I just do the whole thing, how do I know that I've succeeded? So that's the second area that we train in terms of the skill set. And that is, who am I going to ask a question of? So who's feeling that pain today? And that could just be an example of one of the people in the call center, right? So who's taking those inbound calls in the previous example? And it might be James or Alexander or whoever it is. And you say at the end of a process where we think we've fixed the problem and we've tried this thing with a group of people, we ask a person a question, and the answer has to be a yes or no answer. So quite often we use the word dramatic. Will it dramatically reduce ABC? Will it dramatically increase? Will it make a dramatic difference to the number of transactions that one call center person can handle? Will it dramatically make a difference to the number of customers we can onboard in a week, et cetera, et cetera? So that way the answer when you say yes or no can't be sort of, because you can't sort of dramatically do something. Okay? So number one, the problem. Number two, you state it as how do I know I've succeeded?
Do you put a number on the dramatically reduced, or is it normally a statement of emotion, like dramatically reduced, or a feeling? Is it possible to put numbers on it?
50-50. So one of the bewares that we teach people is beware. Well, one of them is beware hidden agendas. So someone says, what we're trying to do is we're trying to sack half of the people in the call center, but we can't tell people that. Then it's disqualified, because the whole point of this approach over previous approaches is that people must understand what we're trying to achieve commercially here. So, if we can't tell people, it's useless as a measure, right? But then the second one is the one you're talking about, right? Where you go, I forgot your question.
The question was...
We can always cut that out.
No, at all. We don't need to cut that out. I think it's great. I actually think the humanity of not having all the answers is right. I really believe that. My question was, is it an emotional statement about dramatic reducing something, or is it a numbers thing? And you said beware of hidden agendas, like 50% of staff.
Yeah, I got distracted. But
I'm very distracting, I understand.
So if you've got numbers, they're great. And if you can measure them, they're great. But a relative measure is one of the things we say beware of. If someone says we're going to reduce it by 10%, well, you have to have a baseline. And a lot of companies don't have that baseline data. So if I say I'm going to reduce the turnaround time by 30%, well, you have to show me how you track that data. And we've got to come up with a way to track the same data during the pilot for only the people who are using the system. And quite often that's just not feasible. The most common reason is they haven't been tracking it in the first place. Like we want to increase customer satisfaction. And you go, okay, well, are you tracking that? They go, no. Well, okay, so we can't use that as a success measure because we can't put our hand on our heart. So I think quite often they can be qualitative, they can be quantitative. Turnaround time's a good one because it's not relative. So we say beware relative measures, but we don't say beware numerical measures. So we might say, and we have done a lot of times with turnaround, very often there is a number. You say, well, we want to reduce it from 13 weeks, which is anecdotal. It doesn't matter that 13 weeks is anecdotal because you're giving an absolute number as the target. And so we want to get it down. For the ones we process, it's got to happen in under 3 weeks. And the other thing here is we train people to look for a very specific 2 items, right? Because a lot of business benefits, and this again comes from experience in rescuing projects. In practice, most digital projects are about one of 2 things. They're about a larger number of things through the same group of humans. It could be the number of applications. It could be the number of customers onboarded. So it's a larger number of business transactions, I call them. I don't mean invoices and cash payments. I mean a customer onboarding is a transaction. So whatever the thing is, that the business process that we're trying to fix, it's more of those without hiring new people, or it's fewer people. We don't hire people when they leave. It's a capacity thing. And the second one is turnaround time. And the turnaround time is the one that can be a proxy for efficiency, which can then, so if you say I'm going to reduce the turnaround time, then well, probably you've reduced the amount of work as well. So you probably get more done with the same number of people. But it can also be a direct measure of revenue. And a good example of that is if you offer a student a place for a course, the university will understand what the profit for that course is. And if you're not getting people signed up to your course because you're not offering them a place, and someone else offers them a place before you, so your turnaround time is affecting your revenue. So the revenue measure tends to be the turnaround time one.
And that really makes sense.
Beautiful.
Good. Part 2, after a quick libations break. What you're making me think there, I'm just going to replay this. Talk about the problem long enough so people stop talking about the problem, the solution, sorry, immediately pointing to something like Salesforce. Well-stated outcomes, nominating one sponsor. How do we know that we've succeeded? And name a person that's feeling that pain so you can measure it with them. Use statements like we want to dramatically reduce, and where you've got baseline performance numbers, you can talk about metrics for improvement. And you're training people to look for 2 key items, a large number of transactions that need to be increased, for example, or improved turnaround times. They're the 2. You've also said it's a process and a skill. Okay. So, all right, I'm a willing executive, and I've done those things. Let's say I'm not using ThunderLabs, okay? I'm not, because I've got my own idea and I want to do it myself. What's the on-ramp for me to bring a philosophy like this to my organization? Like, how do I get started when my organization is either agile, waterfall, or something in between? If you could say anything to anybody wanting to get started in a modern delivery approach, what would you say to them?
I'd say it's going to be hard, to be honest.
Okay, end podcast.
So people have been trying to copy, people who are doing this well. The ones that are doing it well are the ones that started, sometime before the 1950s. So more recently than the 1950s, I mean. So big companies have been around forever and are turning over 3 billion, which is typically, our customer base. There's an interpretation of those things that's almost impossible because you're within the constructs of the matrix, right? So you're inside the matrix and you're trying to expand your mind. But when you're reading stuff like the Spotify, there's a couple of really great videos from Henrik Nieberg, and I would point people to those. But people have been looking at those videos for years, and the guy says in the video, don't do ABC, do X, Y, Z. And people go away and they do ABC. So, theoretically, I would say watch the first Henrik Nieberg Spotify video, but actually listen to what he says. Number 2, I would say read team topologies, team of teams, because they will educate people on what you're trying to achieve, which is autonomy, which creates motivation. That's the delivery piece, though, we're talking about. Right? So we've set it up for success because we've defined what success means to us really clearly in a way that everyone in the team, the broader team in the organization can understand, right? And that's number one. Number two then is, okay, well, how do you have a team deliver that? And you'd be surprised, because actually if you give that objective to the team instead of a document, they'll actually go, and if you give them access to some pilot users, then they will actually figure it out. Just their delivery process will then be hampered by a whole bunch of internal procedures and processes that get in the way between the team and getting software to a small group of users, because those processes are set up for the current world, right? And that current world is you build it all, you test it all, and then you go live. Now, in that environment, you've got to be really, really careful not to do that until everyone's happy. Right? So you've got to, if you want to do this at speed, you have to unpick all of those procedures like data governance, security, and you have to create a new version of each of those controls, which isn't, I'm going to do it all at the end. It has to be a thing where the team can move at speed at the beginning of the project, go live at the beginning of the project, knowing that your risk management approach is fundamentally different. You're not managing risk by comparing stuff to a document, you're managing risk by not going live to everyone at the beginning. So in the example I used earlier on, we went live with one agent or one agency, and inside that agency they had one user processing 26 applications. And then once that was working just for that one person, for one course, for one this, for one that, a very limited set of features, we then rolled out to another 2 humans in that same agency, and then build a bit more. But this approach doesn't work if you don't go live at the beginning. So
there's a couple of things which at this point I'm going to mention. A shout out to Sheila, who's going to do the producing on this, because there's a couple of things that don't feel right there. And Sheila, I'm going to ask that we find those customers that think that they already do this. I'd love to know from people who hear this about if they think they take a modern approach to delivery. And so there's an action item from here that we'll look at. And there's a couple of organizations that I've come across in my time. I won't talk about them here because I don't want to, sort of shoot off my mouth without really thinking it through. But what you made me think, Andrew, is this, of an experience forged over 25 years and this methodology honed over 300 projects. It makes me think that there obviously is an appetite in it, because you're not working in organizations that haven't experienced or experimented with some sort of methodology. So I know you didn't say impossible. I acknowledge the word hard just before you picked me up on that particular word. Because, I think, the emergence of life was hard before it wasn't, and then you got life everywhere. And I think that it makes me think about this style of delivery is hard until it isn't, and until it's more accepted. And I do hear the beginnings of that when I'm out there on my rounds, meeting with clients and friends. A question that you prompted me, you talked about team topology. So you talked about, the initiation, you talked about outcomes, you talk about stakeholders. And then you started talking about topology of teams. And I acknowledge again, you talked about philosophy, but what I want to know is what's the makeup of the team? Like, what is the actual topology of the team, other than mindset? Who is in the team to deliver a digital asset in the type of timeframes that you talk to? And you talk about 4 to 6 week delivery timeframes as opposed to a year or 2 or whatever it might be. Who's in the team?
everyone who's required to get a feature live.
And who's that?
So it's always going to be a core team that builds the user interface, and that's quite often something like Node.js, React. So you've got full stack developers. Mm-hmm. I tend to favor technologies that are cheap and ubiquitous, or free and ubiquitous, because they're the ones that are the road most traveled, which means I can get hold of excellent resources at a reasonable price. In some organizations, they've made a decision to have something like a ServiceNow or a Salesforce, and they're using that as a sort of administrative center, a system of record. So in an environment like that, where to get the job done, you've got to put some of the stuff that you're taking from users or showing users into Salesforce. You need someone inside the team who is a Salesforce guru. Okay, so depending on the technology you're using for the solution, you have to have all those skills inside. If you're regularly going into let's say you're a logistics company and you're regularly taking information from and putting information into SAP, you need an SAP integration specialist inside your team. And the other crucial thing about this is they all have to be full-time. So, there's a lot of things that challenge that, like things that would normally be part-time roles like QA quite often wouldn't be, I'm doing QA all day, every day. But you can't break that mold. They have to be full-time. So what that usually means is you train them up on something else that they can also do when they're not doing QA. And there's heaps of things. They could be working with users, getting feedback. They could be like a BA role. Quite often we combine the BA and QA role into a thing that we call a wrangler. So it doesn't so much matter what the core skills are, but there'll generally be three types. If it's a permanent team that is what they call stream oriented in the book, in team topologies, which is the primary team that is working with a particular user base, then that team will typically be using the same technology over and over again to deliver slightly different support to slightly different processes. So we might build something for agents to put applications in. We might build a separate solution for students to put an application in. So they're two code bases, but they'll be typically, because they're working for the same group of admissions, they'll be using the same mix. But the mix isn't as important. There'll generally be three types of thing. There'll be a UI, so there'll be some sort of web development type humans. There'll be quite often an integration type, and there'll be a application specific type. So if we're doing customer onboarding and the customer onboarding people are using Salesforce to onboard their customers, then we'll need a Salesforce person inside the team. If it's a student admin system, then we'll need a student admin system specialist inside the team, full time. So and then integration. So you're almost always integrating into something like that system. So integration is crucial. Did I say that twice?
It doesn't matter. I think it's important, so you should maybe say it again.
Yeah, so the three...
Integration is crucial. I'll do it for you.
So the three are user experience, which is the new bit, and I would use ubiquitous technologies because you move faster. Number two, the system of record, whatever that is. And there might be two. But,
is that a core system, the system of record?
Yeah.
Like an SAP or a ServiceNow or whatever?
Or student admin system.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
And then the integration skill to get between the two.
If there was an industry in Australia right now that's absolutely ripe for this line of thinking, what is it? Like who do you think? And again, not necessarily about us, but who do you think has a huge opportunity if they take accelerated digital delivery and an outcome focus right now? Who has? So it's not just the opportunity, but it's the ability if they get their act together. Who is that?
For me, it's the intersection of two things. One is it's the businesses that are least serviced with automation through technology. And it's the subset of those where they've got a flat enough structure that the people you're dealing with understand what's happening in the coalface, but they're also able to make decisions. Those two things in the bigger organizations that we often work for tend to have a bit of an air gap between them. So the people on the board have more layers between them and the coalface than someone who's in a slightly smaller company because there's just fewer layers of management. So a good example of that would be like a logistics business, construction still, construction's been having a go at automation. They tend to rely on people to build products for them. A few of the ones in Australia have actually tried to build their own tech stacks with some success. So, they're still very manual, lots of rekey happening. You still get people who will give someone a physical delivery document and then someone rekeys it for them. So those sorts of environments where people are still doing that, but they're flatter so that the people you're dealing with can make a decision based on a sensible commercial outcome. So I would say, businesses turning over sort of 100 million, 200 million to maybe 800 million rather than 1, 2, 3 billion, where you tend to get that air gap, and they've already been using technology for so long that the incremental difference of a bit of digital often doesn't pay for itself or can be perceived not to.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about what the right pre-thinking would be before a project. We've talked about team makeup. We've talked about types of organizations that might benefit from this type of approach. I want to ask about potential outcomes here. And I'm not necessarily into the detail, but I'm after the headline of the I'm going to get your exact word here. You called it no, let's go outcome, a stated outcome. You know, I understand there's a cascade. You can get to one outcome, then the next, and then the next, and the next. But what's the outcome that you've seen that has blown your mind the most? And maybe if it wasn't the initial outcome, but it was the end outcome. Which one really grabs your attention?
Ministerial briefing system for ministers / Parliament in Victoria, where the goal was, I'm paraphrasing.
Sure.
I'm going to say a bunch of people, hundreds of people, are responsible for coordinating people to author papers for a minister for a potential question they might get asked in Parliament. And that happens every sitting of Parliament, which from memory is a fortnightly process. And for 2 nights of every sitting, there was a huge amount of stress for hundreds of people. Like we're talking about a department with tens of thousands of people in it. And every sitting of Parliament, you've got the old ones that have to be reviewed, and you've got the new ones that have to be written because someone's realised that there's a topical thing in the news and that might come up in Parliament. So this is sort of this crescendo of work that just goes up and up, not quite exponentially, but it feels like it. And a huge amount of stress around it, where people were trying to coordinate that through email, through phone calls, through whatever, for the authors that they were responsible for. And those people were on stress leave. Those people were seeing psychologists. Those people were it was really, really stressful. They were up till midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, making sure that ministers had the briefing document that they needed to get into Parliament. Really tough one with the business case, because they always got the briefing papers out, right? They never missed it. So you couldn't say, this is error prone and there's a cost to that and all that sort of stuff. But the human cost was immense, especially when you multiplied it through so many people. And, we built a solution for one coordinator, for 5 authors, for only the new briefing papers for one minister, Minister for Technology from memory. And, that was done in less than 3 weeks. And it was just one of the most dramatic changes. Like, we had people in tears for how successful it was.
Was that the outcome you wanted to measure, if you could make someone cry?
No. And I can't remember the exact way we phrased it. We didn't say Judy has regained the will to live, or has Judy regained the will to live? But it was something similar. It was, has there been a dramatic reduction in Judy's stress levels as a result of using the new system? And there were tears involved. It was positive tears, not negative tears.
So is the advice then to every executive who might be listening to this, thinking about projects, that what success would make your employees cry with happiness? Is that the one?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's
not such a daft outcome, is it?
Yeah. It's not a commercial outcome, but it's a very human one, and it was dramatic. It was huge. And one of the things I liked about this is one of our earliest projects back in 2013, and what I like about it is that it was one of the places that we tested the idea that the initial pilot users had like a chat box, on the actual solution itself that they were using to build a briefing paper for the minister and pass it around and discuss it, change it, all that sort of stuff on a web page. There was a little chat box, and that chat box went straight to the developers. It was a bit of a test, but we had stuff where once we got to the main checkpoint, so we have a checkpoint about halfway through the pilot phase where we say, right, have we solved the base problem, and now we'll go away and we'll build some enhancements that people have been asking for. And during that phase, people were just bashing stuff in, and we had several examples where it was like, wow, that's a really good idea, and Dan would just write the code and deploy it like in the same day. Like they would have a chat conversation sometime in the morning and sometime in the afternoon. That was in production for the pilot group. And people freak when you say that, because IT people freak out, but you've got to just keep restating that we're talking about 5 users here, not thousands or tens of thousands.
Was that driven by IT? So was the vision for that originally IT, or was it a business user? I mean, I guess why I'm asking that is, where's the genesis moment for someone to say that we have this outcome in mind? Is it IT? Is it the business?
No, business people are the ones that come up with the problem. That's what the point I was going to make about the direct feedback is it actually creates. So we created at someone's request, we created the ability to invite other people. So Judy, one of the authors, could invite someone. Someone might say, I've heard about this thing. It sounds pretty cool. How do I get access? And they would just be able to send them an email link, click on the link, and then they had access. And in the words of the CIO, and we didn't hear the story until a couple of years later, they used the word viral. They said this system wasn't rolled out. It got demanded. It went viral, even in its very early stages. And we're talking about a project that was only, I think, from memory, 11 weeks long, all up.
Right, okay.
The pilot was 3 weeks, as you'd imagine.
So does that mean if it was a 3-week pilot and it's 11 weeks in total, there was 3 phases to the project to get to the outcome, or did it not quite break down that way?
2 phases, the pilot and then the rest.
Yeah, right, okay.
And it's just this is the thing about the Spartan approach. It's just everything is rinse and repeat after the pilot. You have a think about, okay, do I want to add more features or more users with the same features? But those decisions you sort of make along the way based on feedback from the people currently using the system and the sponsor. So you're gradually building just enough features to be able to roll out to just a bigger group, but you never ever roll out to a massive group at any point during that process. It's always incremental.
Okay.
And that way your risk is almost zero all the way through the project, because you're not really making that much change for every release that you do. You're not adding too many users and you're not adding too many features.
Do you mind if I just change tack? One of the things that I've heard you talk about, Andrew, and I think it's even in your book, is that you talk about projects that have failed twice or failed to get funding twice as a key place that people would insert you. I've also heard you describe it as project rescue, and for some reason it doesn't quite land with me. And I know we were talking about it in preparation for this today, and the bit that I wanted to hear you talk about a little bit more is, this concept of loosely coupled applications, which, and I know you're going to articulate the words on, but actually I was thinking of someone I've been dealing with, Stan Belikoff, who talked to me about momentum being a leader's best friend, and it's really stuck with me about him and then the work that you do. And on my mind is how we help CIOs or business owners, stakeholders, maintain momentum through delivery of value, so that their projects keep on being well thought of, keep being sponsored, have momentum, And so on my mind is like, how would we bring it the process all the way forward from project rescue and failure all the way to the beginning of a process when someone's actually just thinking about what could be done. And there's a lot in that, I know, but I'd be really interested in your thoughts on that.
So the first thing I'll say is that we created a business that does this because we wanted to do that, right? We wanted to get it right from the beginning.
Yes.
So when I say to people, customers, well, actually, people who aren't customers yet is where I use that phrase the most, right? It's because they're sat there trying to identify, how do I know when to give you a call? Like, it's a really reasonable question. Right? Well, how do I know out of the 100 projects that I'm being talked to about this week from the business, how do I know the right one for you guys to start on? So it's only in that context that I would say pick something that's failed, because you've got a bunch of people who are pre-approved mentally to try something new. Doing anything new in the human psyche is subconsciously perceived as dangerous. So the reason I go for Project Rescue as the first gig to try with a customer is just that it's easy to identify. Like, so has it failed twice is a really simple thing. And if it has failed once or twice, then people are going to be more receptive to trying a new way of doing things, because you can just point to the old failure and go, well, if we do it the same way the third time, we're going to get the same result, right? So it's not that I want to always do project rescue. You know, out of desperation, I created a company that was called in to do something else. The second point I would say, back to one of your earlier questions, is these problems are problems that I was seeing in non-agile projects, right? These are problems with projects in general that I don't think waterfall deals with particularly well either. So for me, this third way, the Spartan way, which is different from waterfall and different from agile, is actually about fixing some of the problems that I used to have to go and rescue. Like, you know, the first question I would ask when I arrived of my direct reports, and usually you'd have somewhere between 8 and, in some really bad cases, 15 people directly reporting to you on a £70 million program. The first question I would ask people is, what's the commercial outcome we're going for? And invariably, year after year, for 15 years, people didn't know. Oh, we're doing a call center replacement. Well, yeah, but what's the outcome of that? Like, what's the commercial? Why are we doing it? Like, you know, and if you get to set that up correctly from the beginning, which is the training we talked about earlier on, then you can succeed from the beginning. It's not, it really isn't rocket surgery. It's a simple question and answer process that you can train people in a day.
Feels quite analogous with people investing in medicine once they're sick, you know, but not investing in themselves preventatively, you know, preventative measures. And it's not just, you know, it's not just in health, but I wonder if there's a bit of human nature. And I really acknowledge the point that it might be, it's easier to identify once people have, you know, failed. Or it's easier to identify and they're willing to take a risk. I mean, what a shame, though, that I think that people wait until that moment, right?
It's a very good analogy.
Thank you. It's a new word. I learned that today.
Analogy?
Analogous. No, I think I might have heard on Tim Ferriss or something, or maybe Joe Rogan, but I liked it. I think they asked exactly the same question. Okay, all right. That makes sense to me. Do you mind if I ask you a couple of things that are not related to this, Spartan? We talked a lot about enabling line managers or managers or lines of business or stakeholders, whatever the appropriate person in the hierarchy is. You're also an entrepreneur. You have sold businesses that you've created in the past. And that's when I first met you. I met you when it was, you know, tiny.
I've sold one business.
Okay, I like to think of it as businesses. It just makes it
I've
sound.
started a few, but I've only sold one.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. You told me yesterday you started 7 and sold 1. Is that right?
Back to specificity.
Yeah. I think 1 in 7 is a pretty good hit rate. Okay, so you've sold 1 out of 7. What a failure. So we've talked about giving advice to CIOs, CFOs, COOs, people who want to get outcomes. If you were to reflect on your entrepreneurial journey, and you were giving advice to someone thinking of a services business or a product business or whatever it might be they have as their dream, what have you learned? What advice would you give them? What's the number one tip?
I actually think these are related to the previous conversation in a really fundamental way, because I've chosen to I've attempted in all cases to create a business that was dealing with humans differently. And what I found from succeeding in that, and I've heard some people express this in much better ways than I've ever expressed, is you get better output. If you have motivated humans, you end up getting more done. It's one of the myth-busting things that I do in the training is we talk about this thing called the project management triangle, which is this idea that you have scope, cost, and quality. Time. Scope /
I know what you mean.
You know what I mean? That's three. And the idea is that the area of the triangle always stays the same. It's just bullshit. You can have a motivated team of highly skilled people that cost the same as, you know, a larger team of people who are less motivated. And that the area of that triangle dramatically changes. And people know this in intrinsically, because they talk about 10x developers. Well, those developers don't cost 10 times as much. So, you know, that area of the triangle changes dramatically depending on whether people are motivated or not. And I honestly don't think it has that much to do with skill. I really just think it has to do with motivation. Because people switched on, motivated, are happier, the output is dramatically higher. So my goal with the businesses that I build, which is the same goal when I'm trying to apply Spartan, is motivated individuals. And the research shows, and it's not my research, I'm sure Dan Pink has got a video somewhere on this stuff.
He does.
But there's a lot of research that has gone into how do you motivate people, and the number one lever is autonomy. If people have autonomy to do a thing, then they're more motivated. And then there's what is it? What's the third one? Mastery.
He has mastery, autonomy, and purpose as the key tenets.
Yeah, which for me the other way around. It's like for me the mastery comes from the fact that you've been given purpose and autonomy. I guess it's chicken and the egg, but so my suggestion as opposed to advice is it's more fun to build. If you've got a choice of building two businesses and one has motivated people in it, because you're able to give them autonomy, that's way more fun. And I'm speaking from personal experience. And I've had some extremely successful people who are way more successful than I have in terms of financial outcomes of selling businesses. That have like attended our yearly offsite, before we sold the business and gone, wow, I in my old business, and we're talking about hundreds of millions type business. I prided myself in doing cool shit with cool people, but I've never seen anything like this. And so for me, that's probably the most satisfying thing I've ever had anyone say to me. It wasn't about recognition; it was just about a nod of the head from a person who gave a shit.
So just summarising that, so it's looking for persons that are intrinsically motivated.
No.
Okay.
It's about...
I'm glad I'm summarising incorrectly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's a good question, right? So I don't mean it's a selection process. I mean you can actively change people's motivation. Same people who are unmotivated today, you put them in a different situation and they're 100% motivated. And the difference between their current situation and a new one is autonomy. Back to my point earlier on about if you want to do this for yourself, you just need to systematically look at what is standing in the way of that team doing its own thing for its own reason. You've got to give them purpose. That's the outcome. So guys, I mean in a generic sense, team, I want you to go away and figure out how to get the number of inbound contacts down for this group of people here. You're only dealing with 2 users at the moment, but eventually we're going to do this for everyone. So I want you to go away and do that. Now, if the first thing they do is hit a roadblock because 15 architects have to be involved, there's no autonomy in that. And that's one of the things that team topologies doesn't really address for me. It doesn't try to, but I think you need to read that book plus some other stuff. And that's where I think Team of Teams comes in, because they talk about that a lot. They talk about autonomy. They don't talk about how to get it, though.
So I acknowledge your point, and I think what you're saying is create an environment of autonomy. Motivation doesn't necessarily have to be intrinsic, because you can take a person that feels ill performing in one environment and bring him into this environment, and that they'll perform, right. And so, but back to the entrepreneurial advice, I think that I'm trying to get my head around is to create an environment in which people are given autonomy and therefore will perform. I think is what you're saying.
Creating the environment,
yeah,
which is not straightforward.
Yeah, it's definitely a subject for podcast number 2, because there's really something in that I've struggled with. Even in our own adventures, because I really like mastery, autonomy, and purpose as a concept. I think in the pursuit of freedom, which is something I learned from one of my mentors. I mean, that's what I want for myself and everybody. There's an organisation that we touch or we influence. I want and there's so many layers to that. So I just might. I might just pause and come back to it for a second and think about it. A standard question that I've realised I want to ask people, if you reflect on the last 2 years in your personal life, what do you want to ditch and what do you want to double down on?
My personal life? Sort of doing that now, I think. Ditch laziness and do more exercise.
So double down on exercise. You have to answer it in the right sequence. Now I'm being specific.
Okay.
Ditch laziness, double down on exercise.
Yeah, well, activity, let's say. Not because I'm not the guy that goes to the gym. I just find it boring.
Well, you're so ripped, it surprised me.
Yeah. Luckily, this is not a video podcast.
That's what you think. I've got a webcam up in the corner there.
Yeah.
And If you've mentioned team topologies, I'm asking you about the books that you recommend, and thank you for the copy of Team Topologies. Team Topologies, Teams of Teams. Is there a third book that you recommend that you think people should be reading?
One of my all-time favourites is The 4-Hour Workweek, but not because of the 4-hour bit. There's just so much in that book about philosophy in life that I've picked up and taken as my own. My favourite, the central theme for me is mini retirement. So pulling forward to today a small flavour, and you can see the similarities here with Spartan, right? It's the same philosophy, which is don't try and do it all later. Start now. I think the example he uses in the book is, you might like Lamborghinis. Go rent one. One of two things will happen. You'll be over it because that was great fun, and you'll stop thinking about it. Or you'll get so motivated by it and go, God, I want one of those things, that you'll move mountains and buildings to get your Lamborghini, which is, either of those outcomes is very positive.
Tim Ferriss has been back on my radar recently for some reason. I don't know why. It's like the universe is speaking to me as well. Tim Ferriss and Huberman. That was a good podcast recently. I enjoyed it. Some of those themes came up, although it got a bit meatheady and about training and weights and bench pressing and stuff. But anyway, I like the guy. There's I can't recall it now. This is why we need the producer in the room with us, Andrew, because there was a podcast recently about bringing forward the things that inspire you to sustain you, and I think that's what the key tenet you're talking about of the 4-hour work week. And so that resonates. Okay, just a couple of closing thoughts. You told me your books. You told me about your advice. If you were a supervillain, who would you be and why? You have to answer.
I'm blank. There's definitely one there I'm thinking of, but I can't. It's not conjuring up in my mind. There's definitely a supervillain.
Yeah.
Quite keen on.
I see you as like a scientist, to be honest. When I look at you, you immediately remind me of a character as both good and evil from the same same movie. I see you as like a Dr. Octavius.
Why does that ring a bell?
He's the the eight-armed bad guy from Spider-Man.
Oh yeah.
But funny enough, I would also see you as Spider-Man. Because again, also a scientist, some sort of science-induced
socially awkward as well. Yeah.
Not only Spider-Man, he's cool, mate. Maybe you should just stop.
No, he's not.
He is.
No, he's deliberately always saying the wrong thing. It's part of his character.
You think it's deliberate?
No, it's a deliberate part of his character. As in, whoever wrote his character was very specific about that, I think.
Yeah. But maybe Peter Parker is deliberately obfuscating that he's Spider-Man being awkward. A bit like Clark Kent does. But you can't be Superman because he's not a scientist. You're more scientisty.
Yeah, it's bugging me.
No,
there is definitely a character that makes me laugh. That's a supervillain. It might not be a comic though. Maybe that's what's getting in the way of my memory. It might be like a Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels type person. There's definitely a baddie in something that I like a lot. So I will come back to you.
I'll ask you the same question next time to see if it's come back to you. But until that person, you have to be Octavius / Spider-Man. Okay. I think that's about it from me because I'm conscious of time. Do you have any summarising thoughts from this, or anything you'd like to ask me by the end of this? And please don't make it a difficult question. I've done hours of preparation for all this great stuff. So
there is something that I think is worth adding to a previous conversation that we're having, because it's in that category of how would someone go about doing this for themselves, which relates to the conversation around autonomy, right? So I think the first thing I would say is that if you have 2 or 3 bright people and you put them in a room with a few pizzas one evening with some wine and give them the list of, or they've already got a list of reasons why they don't have autonomy. Okay, so here's the thing that got in my way today. Here's the thing that got in my way today. So maybe before you start, you've gone through that process for a month and you've got a team of people trying to deliver at speed, frustrated, and they just write down in a list, in a spreadsheet, this is what got in my way. Put those people in a room and say, how do you fix that? And they will eventually come up with a bunch of things, and there'll be a pattern to those things. So I want to talk about the pattern because it'll help people to go, it's going to probably be one of these 3 things that we do here, right? So pattern number one is you delete. A good example of that is architecture. So if you've got a team that's always delivering the same type of technology, there's an opportunity to get the architecture folk to rubber stamp that set of technology for that purpose. So, for example, I am approving over, they go through the normal architecture process, but they just don't do it with a particular application. They do it with a theoretical application. You say, okay, we're going to be taking information from a student, which includes PII, not medical records, and we want to store it in this environment here. We're going to encrypt data at rest. We're going to put it here. We're going to use files at this, S3. We're going to whatever that picture is, right? Which then means every time they deliver something, a new project, whatever, they don't have to go through that. So that's a delete. And there's a few things that fall into that pattern where you can just stop doing stuff because you've organized your team to work with the same group of people with the same technology. The second one is certification. And this would apply to things like security, data governance, which all have to be done, right? And they have to happen on a per project basis. You can't do that with a template. Security, I believe you can, but not data governance. So how do you do that? Well, if you just sit down and think about it for 10 minutes, there's only really one way you can do that, which is it's still got to happen, and it can't be a separate group of people you have to call. So we should have, well, actually, either of the second or third pattern would work here, but for me, certification is the easy one, where you say to the data governance group, okay, folks, we are going to move towards a model where you trust us to do data governance. You trust us because there's two people in the team, so one can be off, one can be on. And you train us and you certify us. And from that point forward, you trust us, maybe within certain boundaries, to go live without consulting you. And then you have the ability to audit us whenever you want. Maybe you do that regularly, maybe you do it ad hoc, where you come in and look at what we've done. We might have to produce certain artifacts so that you can come and audit us. But basically, you take it away from being what I would describe as a synchronous process. So you can shut us down because we've done the wrong thing for a period until we're recertified. But you don't get in the way of each release, including the first release for a new project. So that's certification. And the third thing is ingestion. So a good example of that would be the ServiceNow example we used earlier on. So, okay, we can't go live without sending this information into ServiceNow. And that's pretty much every project we run. So we need someone in the team that can do ServiceNow and is allowed to do ServiceNow without asking anyone. So they have access to production and all that sort of stuff, right? So they have the skills to do it. And then you're also looking at removing the gates to do it using one of the other patterns. So there's three patterns: delete, certify, or ingest.
And that's... sorry, you go.
And back to the previous, sometimes they're not full-time resources. So, and I've seen people attempt the data governance thing by ingesting someone. So they get someone from the team to do data governance for them. But the mistake they make is that they allow that to be a part-time resource. So you just end up waiting for them. So because they're doing other stuff as well, right? Whereas if you ingest them and say, okay, you're now my team full-time, you no longer work full-time in the data governance team, you've got a dotted line to them, then you have to learn another skill because you're not doing data governance all day, every day. So, we'd have to get you to do some QA, and that doesn't often work. So for me, it's better to do it the other way around with things like data governance, is like train, certify, audit.
Okay. And that, I feel like I want to spend more time in understanding that, because you talked about putting a group of people in a room with some wine. If they drink, obviously they can have a glass of water. They don't talk. Cup of tea. Nice cup of tea. Around solving problems, and I feel there's another. I've actually captured that as a potential podcast for our second one as well. So there's a lot of potential themes I'd like to explore here. But look, as I was saying, Andrew, I think I want to pause it there because there's a lot to go with in terms of the things that we've discussed, including about how people might set themselves up well for an approach like Spartan, whether it be Spartan or not. The team makeup, the outcome focus, a combination of process and skills. I still feel like there's a lot to unpack there. But again, I've only known you 10 years, so, we got time, right? We should be an expert by now. All right, thank you very much. Cue fancy music.